Oh, hold on. Welcome, everybody, to Hear Me Dragons. Oh, I can hear my... There I am. God, there is some echo going on. But hopefully it won't be too bad. Yeah, so everybody, I forgot to do this the way that I'm supposed to do Hear Me Dragons. I just popped this up instead of doing the countdown initially. So you got to see us sitting there, not talking for a few seconds. But glad to have you all here. Stev is out sick today. He's got a pretty bad cough and has lost his voice. So I'm running the ship. It's all going to go down in flames today. But back with me this week is Jared Kozal, Doctor of Dragons, hired actor.
Unofficial Star Wars correspondent for the Hear Me Dragons channel.
Yeah, you'd think I'd get tired of the whole hired actor bit, but no, I'm just going to keep bringing it back. That's right, I'm the captain now. So this week we're talking the second half of Star Wars Visions. That's episodes 5 through, well, we say episodes, but really they're not episodes. They're short films. So the final 5 films of the season. First of all, Jared, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, John. How are you?
Good. It's great to have you back this week. And I love that we were able just to go straight into the second half instead of waiting, because I loved these films this season, and I'm very excited to get to talk about them. What was I know it's kind of hard because these are all so distinct, but what was your general impression of these back 5 films?
I really, really liked them, especially now that I've gotten a chance to revisit them all a couple of times. I still maintain that Sith and Screecher's Reach, the first 2 installments in the volume, are probably my favorites overall. But there are a couple of really strong entries in this back half. In particular, there's one of them I actually think the Spy Dancer is probably actually in that top tier with Sith and Screecher's Reach for my favorites from the volume. And overall, I enjoyed every single one of these. I found, powerful messages in each of them. I really think that as a whole, Visions Volume 2 is probably stronger than Visions Volume 1, at least in terms of my personal preference. But I just continue to think that this is such a cool project, and I'm looking forward to it hopefully continuing in the future.
Yeah, it's funny because going into this second season, I think maybe not going into it, but for the build up of it as it was announced, I was disappointed that it wasn't going to be a second season of all anime, because I just loved that premise for the first season, and I've become a really big fan of anime just because it's a very different kind of animation from especially what we get in the United States, where and if I'm not careful, I'll go on my rants about animation and how it's treated here in the US, but most of the time here in the US, for at least the big stuff that gets released, it's the feeling is that animation is for kids, and with Japanese animation that is decidedly not the case. But having said that, and even with being apprehensive about changing that up, I would agree. I think this season has been stronger, and a big part of that is the variety of the different kinds of stories, the animation styles. And it's just great to get that point of view on Star Wars from, all kinds of different cultures. Because it gives you a different way to think about it. I never thought I'd like it. I think one of the most distinctive films from this back half is the Bandits of Golak. I think it's called, because it is so like steeped in Indian culture, and it's just not something that you would see in a mainstream canon Star Wars story. And so I just love that. And yeah, I do agree. I think we're in pretty solid agreement about probably what our top three maybe are. Although, and I'm interested to hear if your opinion has changed at all, because I know initially you didn't. I don't think you ranked Journey to the Darkhead super high in like your ranked order, but that was one of my favorites. But I think my top three are Sith, Screecher's Reach, and also the Spy Dancer. Although I think Screecher's Reach and the Spy Dancer are like my top two. I just love the Spy Dancer so much, just for its story, and what I think Sith has so much is so much of the style of that one. It really stands out, and Spy Dancer has a lot of great style, but I was really touched by the story as well. I think it's a very emotional one. So, but I think we're kind of, for the most part, in the agreement about our top picks, which, shocker.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's go ahead and start off the top with Journey to the Darkhead. I really like this one a lot because it is the most ambitious of the season, and it does kind of, if the rest of these are kind of the independent short films, of Star Wars around the world, Journey to the Darkhead, like the Ninth Jedi from last season, does feel kind of like the mythic, epic, that is the blockbuster of the of the cinema year. And I don't know, I'm a sucker for that, and I like the juxtaposition of whereas the Ninth Jedi took place like in the distant future of the timeline, such as it is, with these being non-canon stories. This one takes place in the far past, during the old conflict between the Sith and the Jedi, but it feels as, like, again, the word I use is ambitious. It's just, you can imagine like a full, at least 5 seasons of television devoted to telling an epic story set here. And yeah, that's why, like, I really wouldn't, some of these I don't want to see continuations of, but there are other ones like Ninth Jedi, and I think this one too, where I'd like to spend some more time in the world if they wanted to do like an animated film or even a novel or something like that. I think there's room to tell that story. Anyway, so okay, those are my sort of initial thoughts about this one. Where have you ended up landing on this one?
So I'm very, very glad that I have had a chance to watch all of these multiple times now, because you mentioned on my initial, like, after I watched them all for the first time, I did a little post on Twitter basically writing my initial ranking. And Journey to the Darkhead was towards the bottom. I think I had it 8th. But part of it was that just the fact that exactly what you mentioned, John, was so epic and it was so ambitious that I think part of the reason I ended up ranking it lower initially was I wanted more from it. But in a good way, like, kind of the sense of, like, it was the most epic. It did have the most world building. It did have all those elements that I love in the fantasy stories. It did remind me very much of the Ninth Jedi from Volume 1, in that it felt like it was setting up the most rich and realized world of any of the shorts so far. With the planet that Aura hails from, that where they are Force oracles that interpret visions that fall down from the rain and are only visible on these rocks for a few moments before vanishing. And I just thought that was such a cool concept. And then these two giant mythic statues, which are supposed to represent the light and the dark side, I'm just like, this is epic. And then the Sith Lord Bishan with his like cool scorpion lightsaber whip design. I'm like, I'm loving all of this. And I'm just like, I could spend like a full like movie length in this thing. And then the story was over in 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, I guess that's it. But one of the reasons I'm glad that I, got to watch it a couple times is on second viewing and third viewing, when I wasn't just, lost in, ooh, look how cool all this is. I did manage to appreciate that. I do think the Journey to the Dark Head does tell a complete story within this time frame. That's not to say it couldn't be expanded like the Ninth Jedi or so many of these others, but I do think that ultimately the story about, destiny and fate and whether or not you can change it, and kind of the loss of hope and finding reasons to go on and continue the fight despite the, as what Toll ends up saying, the wave, kind of being this eternal battle between light and dark. I do think that ultimately the short told its story. And once that kind of settled into that, I liked it a lot more because it felt complete in a way that I think on my initial viewing, I was kind of torn between like, oh, there's more that could be told here, but also like, wow, they really wrapped that up right quick. But again, was just really my first impression of it. And I do think on repeat viewings, this one has risen up the rankings for me. It's not in that top tier with Sith and Screecher's Reach and The Spy Dancer, but it is higher. And if we want to do like our final rankings toward the end of the show, it'll probably fall closer to the middle of the pack of this one.
You know how I generally feel about rankings. Not a fan, but no, what I love about it is you're right. It does reach an emotional conclusion with the characters, but also there's this sense that for let me make sure I get the names right. That Aura and Tool, that they will go on, and that they're going to have a bond that carries through into whatever the further adventures of this story are, because it's an ongoing war and that's going to be happening for a while, and you can just imagine this rich wonderful story that'll carry on. And I love just little touches like even the Jedi characters on the council, like, you got the old woman who says the idea is not, absurd or whatever. And then the other guy's like, what, are you kidding me? It's just already, they feel like great personalities that I could see us getting to know those characters better too. And so, I think it's that's the thing that's so brilliant about so many of these shorts is like they're bite-sized, but so many of them do so much in such a small amount of time. Even the ones that we're perfectly content with the 15 minutes that we get, it's just sort of amazing what they're able to pack story-wise and character-wise and theme-wise into all these stories. And I love the fact that this isn't the most subtle part of the episode, but I liked the sort of symmetry of it all. I like the fact that there's this notion of cutting off the dark head. That's not what's done, but is still cut off a dark head, which is, which is the Sith Master. So I like that. We can talk a bit more about the characters and themes, but honestly, I just really loved the visual style of this. It's a big part of why I like a lot of Japanese anime, but also in my filmmaking too. I love an active camera, and like during the fight sequences, I love the way that the camera, obviously there's no camera, but the camera sort of whips back and forth with the characters as they're fighting each other. And the overall animation style is just absolutely gorgeous. I love how the characters look, and the design of of like the Sith Master, just with his weaponry, and that it's just we both listen to Force Center, so I'm aping some of this from them, but I'm gonna since it doesn't do any good when I just shout it in response when I'm listening to the podcast, I'm gonna say it now. And Ken did say something about he wants to see these designs brought forward into live action, and I was like, why is it always live action? It doesn't have to be live action. Let's just do more animated iterations of this kind of stuff. So no, I love Ken, but yeah, so were there, I know you mentioned the Sith Master, were there any other like design elements of this that you found really interesting? Because I was mesmerized.
Yeah, well, I alluded to two of them already. One is just the whole concept and idea of these like visions that materialize when rain falls on these stones, but they're only there for a brief second. And in order to actually interpret them, you need to have like the will and the concentration in order to understand what they're telling you. And it takes practice and it takes discipline, kind of like using the Force. And it's a reflection of this culture's interpretation of the Force. And Aura is not a Jedi, but she is active in that way, and you can see kind of where she gets the idea that she has agency to perhaps change the future by trying to prevent this vision from happening, or by breaking the balance between the light and the dark head. And those like kind of two titanic statues, they kind of reminded me a little bit of like the Argonath from Lord of the Rings. But I also really liked the visualization where initially you think that one head is the light-sided head and one side is the dark-sided head, but then as things go on, you start to see that they're being blended, they're being mixed. And I really enjoyed the way that was interpreted, because it did not ultimately. One of my personal pet peeves in Star Wars is the entire concept of quote unquote gray Jedi. I do not think they exist. Certainly not in George Lucas's interpretation of the Star Wars canon, the nature of the dark side. But the dark side is a natural thing. It's not something you can destroy. It will always be part of the Force. But what the Sith do is the Sith, seek to unnaturally spread the dark side and use it to cause chaos and suffering and pain, and that's what upsets the balance, not the existence of the dark side itself. And I really liked the way that they ultimately kind of chose to show that, not by destroying the dark side, or the dark side as symbolized by the dark side head, but by Tool and Aura kind of taking a stand against this one evildoer who was seeking to corrupt and pervert the Force and his and through it, and Tool himself, to the dark side. And throughout the entire short, the Sith Lord keeps mocking Tool by being like, "This is pointless. You're destined to join me. You don't have any power. You don't have any say in this." But ultimately he does, and Aura does as well, when she realizes that she is the figure the third figure in the vision that she saw on the rock that ultimately led her to undertake this mission in the first place. And I thought that was a very kind of elegant way to, bring all those ideas together. And then ultimately Tool, once he finds balance within himself, he is able to defeat the Sith Master. He's willing to sacrifice himself to do it. And in doing so, he saves himself, and Aura ultimately saves him as well. And when they reach the end, and Tool's, and Aura is now like, oh, I guess this mission didn't mean anything in the end. And Tool's like, no, this mission meant something to us. We may not have destroyed the dark side forever, but we have found ourselves, like, within ourselves, kind of the capability that we need to continue the fight, because the fight will always be there.
Yeah, and by the way, I do want to make a comment real quick. I've been drawing so many comparisons between this episode and the season 1 episode, The Ninth Jedi, that I just sort of offhandedly was referring to Japanese anime, which I meant. What I actually meant to say was just anime. This is not Japanese anime because it's a Korean short. So I want to make that distinction and apologize to people who are screaming at me through the screen. I definitely am aware. I just misspoke, and it's, once again, pulling from the different cultures this season, and yeah, I will say, and I went ahead and watched this in the Korean language, and I once again want to voice my frustration with what Disney is doing with the subtitles. All there is a English closed captioned option for the English language, at least, which is not a great. It's not a super great translation because it's just based off of the English dub, and it also includes like all the sound effects throughout the episode. So not great. They had the same problem in season 1, and they still haven't fixed it, and maybe they're just maybe not enough people are upset about it, but I just wanted to go ahead and highlight that once more. But it didn't get in the way of me enjoying the short, because it's a beautiful piece of work. Yeah, I loved all the stuff with Aura and the fact that, there's so much there about, you talked about she has a choice, and Toll has a choice, and yet she sees a vision in the stone. So it really comes down to like questions of what is free will, what's free will, and what is, what maybe is foretold. But it's because she actively makes the choice to do something about the visions that she sees, whereas her teacher is like, that's not what we do. We simply, observe and write down, what we see. That is the way of it. And so it's her actively saying, no, we should be actually using this information to help. And so she brings herself into that position where she's revealed to be the third figure. So I love those kinds of discussions of like, fate versus free will, and you could go around in circles with something like this. It's like, which came first? But it's really fascinating, and I'm a sucker for that.
I one of the points that, well, shouting out for Center again, one of the points that Joseph Scrimshaw and Ken Knapsack love to make is the idea of destiny. Star Wars, destiny is not like always a rigid fate that is bound to happen to a character no matter what. Destiny is the idea that there are certain inflection points or certain things in life that you, just based on who you are and the time you find yourself, you cannot avoid. but ultimately you still have the power to make that choice in the end. The example that they tend to cite is the idea that, in Return of the Jedi, when Yoda and Obi-Wan tell Luke that, like, you are destined to, you must face Darth Vader again. And that they're right, because ultimately Darth Vader and Luke are kind of bound together, and just by the nature of who Luke is and by who Darth Vader is, they are not going to, spend the rest of their lives, running from each other. They're going to be drawn together. But whereas the Emperor and Vader try to convince Luke that he has no choice, it's inevitable, you will fall to the dark side. Ultimately, Luke takes that moment that he is destined for, and he makes the better choice, and then he helps Anakin find that choice as well. And this is kind of a similar idea, where ultimately the Tool, however we pronounce it, he was kind of destined to come back into conflict with this Sith master, Bishan, who killed his master in front of him, but he was not, and he kind of gets the idea at the end, because he doesn't really know how to process it, that it's hopeless. The Sith are coming for us all. I'm basically destined to fall to the dark side, and he just kind of is in the idea that nothing matters, but it does. And because he was destined to face the Sith Lord again, but in the moment, he makes the choice that saves him and kind of saves the balance and allows he and Aura to fight another day, and Aura does as well.
Yeah, got all that stuff is good. And when you mentioned the conflict in Return of the Jedi, I was just thinking about this is off topic. Now I'm just talking about Return of the Jedi, but I just always love that moment Luke throws the saber aside, which, by the way, yes, he does that before Last Jedi. Hey, how about that? But I just love that look on the Emperor's face. Just, he is completely, like, he thought he had Luke completely, and he's just like that bitter disappointment on his face, and like, what just happened?
And he never learns his lesson. 30 years later, he makes the exact same mistake with Rey and Ben Solo. So
yeah,
that's the nature of the dark side.
Yeah. Anything else you want to hit upon with this episode before we move on?
Yeah, no, I'll just again shout out, the South Korean Studio Mir. I found that, I was not really very familiar with their work. I think that this is a great entry point for anyone who's looking for, more kind of anime storytelling in this style, specifically with the South Korean bent. You would also mention the dub, so I will just say this is one where I did watch both the English language track and the Korean language track. And on the first viewing, I did watch it in English, and I enjoyed it. In particular, I enjoyed Daniel Day Kim of Lost fame as the Sith Lord. But when I watched it on the second viewing in Korean, I did actually think that it suited this kind of story better. So not all of them need to watch in the original language, and indeed, I think most of them were originally written and filmed in English. But in this particular case, I thought the Korean track was better.
Yeah, but I will agree that, like, you can never go wrong with Daniel Day Kim, and he was definitely the standout of the English dub. And I have loved him since the days of Angel when he was on that series. So yeah, a big fan of his, and he can do evil Sith Lord really well. Let me see. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, and I've only seen a little bit of Legend of Korra, because I started to watch it like right after I finished Avatar: The Last Airbender. But I just, as often happens with me, where I end up thinking I have enough time to fully invest in something, and then I don't. But it's on my list of things to get back to, because like Avatar: The Last Airbender is beautifully animated, but I was super impressed with what I saw of Legend of Korra. Just in the first couple episodes, that animation style is utterly beautiful. So looking forward to getting into that. So okay, let's move on to the Spy Dancer, which for me is like the standout of this of this set of films. I just loved the entire setting and even though yes, it was written and voiced in English, but you got a bunch of wonderful French actors in there with the French accents, which just is wonderful, and some actors that I actually recognized, and yeah, it's just this one's a very personal story, and it sort of is a spin on. It's funny because another one of the shorts from the first half is called "I Am Your Mother," but as far as like being in the inverse of the Vader "I Am Your Father" moment, this is the one that kind of feels like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just loved how obviously Star Wars is very much rooted in sort of World War II Nazi, sort of parallels. But this one felt especially so. Just where with the French setting and the stormtroopers definitely feel like they're an invading occupying force, and but then you see like glimmers of these are guys who are coming out and they're enjoying a show, so under different circumstances these could be like normal audience members, but oh, that's right, they're awful, they're stormtroopers. And the second things go off the rails, they're immediately like, all right, let's do this, and they don't even think twice about it. So I know you loved this one. So what were your impressions of the Spy Dancer?
So I loved it for many reasons, some of which you've already highlighted. In particular, I just loved the entire feel of it. This really was kind of a noir style kind of story, but it also was very, it gave me Casablanca vibes. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. And similar setting, of like Nazi occupied French, kind of inspired town with like an entertainment venue and so like a lead character who is kind of like ostensibly catering to these to the invaders, but really has the heart of a rebel. And from the moment like that neon kind of title screen hit the screen, the Spy Dancer, and kind of these glowing artistic purple letters, I'm like, I think I'm gonna like this one, and I did. I also love the 2D animation style. Like most of these shorts in this volume, like a lot of them were like 3D, like computer style animation, or more like anime. This looked like a painting. It was, it looked hand drawn, even if they used computer imaging to help render some of that stuff. And the dance sequences with Loey and Hattis like using their kind of their artistic agility and everything to create this beautiful performance that also ultimately has this hidden power and this hidden message is, I just thought it was such a cool concept. So I was enjoying it like right from like all the way up through like the midpoint, and then the twist happens, and the twist is really what sent this one from like, oh, this is just beautiful and cool, to like, this is one of the best, because I did not see it coming. And I thought that there would be some kind of like confrontation with this officer, who is clearly, it seems, like the man who destroyed, her village years ago. And I was like, okay, well, that will be an interesting confrontation. I wonder if she'll, make it out of this. But then it turns out to be her son. And that just, and the way that they resolved that conflict, I just thought was like like awesome and powerful. The fact that, you know, the mother's love kind of endures even though her son has become a monster that who's trying to hide his true nature, you know, where he has, you know, whether it was his adoptive, you know, imperial father or him, you know, his horns have been filed off. He's hiding his heterochromia, like by covering one of his eyes, and he is trying to be something that he is not, but ultimately she still recognizes him as her son. And it ends up being a very hopeful ending, you know, even though ultimately the stormtroopers destroy the theater, as you mentioned, kind of laying waste to this culture that they were like happy to partake in and you know, enjoy, but ultimately like it was hollow because they're denying it to the people to whom this culture ultimately belongs, and they just put their helmets back on and destroy it the second it's no longer of use to them. But the idea kind of at the end that, you know, Loie, who has been fighting this fight for the rebellion for years and years and doesn't really see the point anymore, like regaining her spark of hope just from the idea that she might have a way back to her son and he might have a way back to her. And you can kind of see at the end that the conflict is stirring in the son's, you know, heart and soul. And so you know, I don't know if we'll ever see a continuation of this story, but I kind of feel like she lit the flame that will ultimately lead to him leaving the Empire and them reuniting. At least that's kind of the headcanon that I'm rolling with, because I do think this was ultimately a very hopeful story and a beautifully told one at that.
I do see a sort of Agent Callus, you know, route for him ahead.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's the thing, like, this is one that you could almost see a continuation being told, but it's beautifully succinct and like in telling its story, because the point at the end is that hope has been kindled for Louis and for also for her son in a way that he would not have been anticipating, you know, a different path, and that in of itself is a beautiful ending to the story. And you know, and we're kind of left to sort of have our own headcanon and theorize about where that path might go, but it's a beautiful ending to the film. And I will say, because I did get to watch this one again today, and I picked, like, I was so engrossed in the story the first time around that I didn't pick up on the little like Star Wars, you know, I guess maybe you call them not Easter eggs, but like, you know, the Star Wars touches, like, you know, there's a moment where I think the conductor goes, "I have a bad feeling about this," and it was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
And oh god, what was there was something else.
The kind of in Loie's dressing room there, one of the things that she hangs like her necklaces or whatever on, it's modeled to look like C-3PO, which I thought was a cool touch. And the use of the KX series droid, you know, made famous by K2SO and Rogue One, you know, really is this kind of, you know, almost Terminator like figure who is, you know, like he was like an imposing antagonist. And there were moments when I was like very fearful for what was going to happen to both Loie and to Hatise. You know, there's kind of an interesting little subplot in this one about, you know, the younger performer who wants to be more active in her in the rebellion in this fight, and who ultimately proves herself extremely capable, saving Loie's life not once but twice, or maybe even 3 times. And I just really found that was kind of a, you know, this short like was so well balanced in the way it kind of had its A story and its B story, and then handled the twist, and all like tied it together like very elegantly in like, I think it was like 18 minutes or so. It really felt like a complete, you know, story and film, and I was extraordinarily impressed.
Careful, Matthew. This will quickly, you know, devolve or evolve into an Andor and Rogue One stream. as it doesn't take much for me. No, that droid is like they've done such a great job of instilling like terror in like just the appearance of that droid. Even though we first saw him, you know, as K2SO, but just every time we've seen that droid, you know, in every other instance, it's like you need to be scared. You see that droid, and just the way the younger character, what's Hattis, the way her cheek is grazed, you know, when that droid, you know, fires at her, it's like, oh geez, that was close. And with these stories, you do, especially something that has the tone of this, where everything's so heightened. You know, you do have that fear of any of these characters to go at any second, because, you know, it's a 15-minute short film, and, you know, and because they don't have to worry about making sure we keep this character on for ratings. It's like any of them could die. And the fact that we care about them that much so quickly is just a real achievement. I do want to shout out the character of John, who's sort of the rebel, like he's, what would he be, like an engineer, or, you know, he's voiced by I think the actor's name is Lambert Wilson, or Lambert Wilson. I'm sure there's a French, you know, way to pronounce his first name that I'm probably screwing up, but this is the actor who, obviously, he's been in lots of stuff, especially in French cinema, but I think most of us know him from the Matrix sequels, you know, giving his, you know, speech in the restaurant about causality and all that stuff. But just from that, I've always loved that actor. And this was not the role I expected him to be in when I saw him listed. I thought for sure he'd be like some, you know, steaming, you know, Imperial or something. But it was nice that that's the role he ended up with. And yeah, the performances just across the board were great in this. And again, just the sort of the way the actress who plays Louis, just the way you feel her kind of, she's at the end of her tether. She, you know, when she realizes what's, you know, well, she doesn't yet realize it's her son, but she thinks she's about to get revenge for her son. And just the way she's like, you know, I forget exactly what she says, but I think she says, this is the only way I can be free. And it's just like, it's all so beautiful, and just the way I was on the edge of my seat, you know, for this character. And then when it's revealed that, you know, it's a younger man, and that's when the pieces, you know, the puzzle started, you know, falling into place in my head. And I was like, oh man, I'll tell you, because for me, it's, you know, there's no way this doesn't sound very conceited, but I feel like I've seen so many movies that a lot of times I see twists coming. Like, even when it's something like the Knives Out movies, which are designed to, like, around the elements of surprise, and, you know, and it's like a puzzle box. You know, in both those cases, I haven't known exactly what was going on, but you start to get a feeling like in what direction they're kind of headed. So I was just so pleased when, you know, the halfway point of this episode happened, and I was like, oh my god. Yeah, because it was just an emotional roller coaster when that reveal happens. So yeah. Let me hold on a second. Matthew, we've actually done it, so you need to go back. And of course, I'm always willing to talk Andor, and I haven't done an Andor stream on my channel, so hey, maybe that's an excuse to do another another Andor stream. But yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah, Teleport Gaming here mentioned that there was a real world spy dancer named Matahari, and that is one of the things that in the filmmaker focus they talk about, that kind of inspiration, not only the one you mentioned, but like Josephine Baker and a couple of these other, like these performers who essentially in Nazi occupied France were allowed a certain degree of freedom because they were the entertainment, and they used that, essentially the freedom that their oppressors granted them, thinking that they were doing it for their own benefit, but actually using that information to help the resistance. And this one really does, like, I don't think that Star Wars ever really delves fully into allegory. There's the whole idea about like, oh, didn't, like, in the original trilogy, are the Ewoks supposed to be like the Viet Cong or something like? I don't think it's ever supposed to be a 1-to-1, but there's clearly like inspiration being drawn here, and in this case, the inspiration is very, it's very obvious because it's a French studio making a story that's inspired by similar ideas as the French resistance against the Nazis. And I think that when they do something like this, they actually manage to bring in the Star Wars elements into a way that, like, this still feels like a Star Wars story, not just like a World War II movie. But it's richer for having those influences because they are very, important and universal. These ideas of, resistance and the power of art as well. I really think that it's important, the fact that we kind of touched on earlier, the idea that the stormtroopers are enjoying this French inspired, or this planet's culture, but they don't understand it. They are not like truly appreciating it. They just see it as spectacle, while they, take their helmets off and kick back after a long day of oppressing the very population from whom this culture comes. And then I think it's very elegant, that they don't end up seeing how dangerous that culture can be until it's too late. And some of those fight sequences where Loie and Hattis are using like these fabrics as kind of this very like flowing kind of like almost weapons, and leaping around, almost like they're using the Force. They aren't Jedi, but they are, they're using, they are in tune with their natural, inner spirit in a way. And that ends up making the difference, and allowing them to ultimately escape and fight another day.
It's funny that we're that Andor has been brought up, because there's a lot of this that is very evocative of Andor. You've got like the stormtroopers removing their helmets, so we get to see the sort of humans behind the troopers, which in the end just makes it all the more horrifying that these soldiers are willing to just do whatever's ordered by the Empire, and they're not even really they don't even really need the order. Because the son says, we should have shut down or eliminated this place a long time ago. And that's all that the rest of them need. They don't need an official order to do anything. They're like, all right, guys, let's go, and put their helmets on, and they're ready for, to just unleash violence. And the fact that we see the human faces behind that, just, like in Andor, just makes it all the more chilling. And also the fact that this is a story of rebel resistance, and it's not a story about Jedi. It's not a story about the Force. So yeah, there are those parallels for the Andor fans in our audience today. But no, you touched on things like the opening title and just the setting, and it's all very it does feel like very old Hollywood almost, and that's one of the things that I instantly just loved about it. And just the choreography of the dancing and the show, like, that's before the emotional turn happens where, we find out exactly what's going on. The film is just mesmerizing because, just what, even when Louis, like, sees the officer and she's then trips up, it's so beautiful almost the way she's falling. And then when, hold on, I'm just looking up to make sure I get the names right again. When Hattis jumps down to save her, it's all like, that's none of that is planned, but they do it so elegantly. So then they're like, no, don't worry, it's fine. They thought it was part of the show. But, and also what you mentioned about the Empire taking in the culture of this planet, but not respecting it, not understanding it. And that's something that we see time and time again in Star Wars. It's just the Empire wanting to take from these civilizations and then just leaving nothing behind. It's unfortunately something very real world. And, and I think a lot of these shorts touch on things that hit a bit close to home at times, as these stories often do. So yeah, no. So bottom line, I absolutely adored this short. I just thought it was brilliant, and definitely my third favorite overall of the season. And yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else to touch on?
I'll shout out the music. It was not like a very obvious, but I thought they really used the music like well. There were some very beautiful cues, both in like the natural score, the moment when Loie like hugs her son. I thought that really seemed evocative of certain music cues I've heard before in Star Wars, and that kind of helped pull on the emotional heartstrings. And then also diegetically, like within the story itself, I love the little frog-like band character who just, he continues to play even as, the situation's going to hell. It was like that was a great little character. But yeah, this one was made by Studio La Cachette, which is another studio I'd like never heard of before. But like after seeing this, like I can't wait to check out some of their other work, because this was like this is one where there are certain, one of the things that makes Visions cool is like they're little like 15-20 minute bite-sized elements of Star Wars that you can go back and watch if inspiration happens to strike, if you're just in the mood for a little bit of Star Wars and you don't want to like go do a full like Clone Wars or Rebels rewatch. Like anytime I go back and revisit a famous one of my favorite Clone Wars, I was like, well then I gotta watch the next one. But with this, I can see this particular episode being one that I will be revisiting probably a lot, just because I think it's a very beautifully done short form Star Wars story. And whether or not we ever see any more from this of this particular storyline in canon or non-canon Star Wars storytelling, I hope that Studio La Cachette gets another crack at this, because they really made something special with this one.
Yeah. One of the great things about this is, and I think you mentioned this last week also, it's just a great showcase for these artists to reach an audience that they wouldn't otherwise reach. Star Wars fans come to this and, they're impressed by these shorts, and then they can go look up the other work that's done by the studios, and it just gets their work exposed to a larger audience. And that's great overall for animation too, not just for the individual studios, but to sort of broaden the horizons of, of viewers to see what, that animation isn't just the Saturday morning cartoons you grew up on. There's a whole, industry, where, these artists are crafting these beautiful stories in this rich art form. So, yeah, so I just love that Star Wars is able to do that. And even though I would I still insist for some of these, I'd like to see like an expanded, just an expansion for some of these. So it's both, like a taste of what the studios are capable of, but I kind of hope it's also like, for some of these studios, maybe an audition to do something bigger in the Star Wars playground. So, okay, so we're pretty close to the halfway point. So we'll, I think we'll pause there before moving on to the next one and just do the mid-roll. So, thank you everybody for tuning in. Next, we're still going. That sounds like I was wrapping something up. We're not. Still have another hour to go, at least. But next week, we're going to be talking about, and Stephen will be back, and I believe Nessie will be back too. We'll be talking about the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which I have not seen yet, so I've got to take care of that this week. But I'm actually really looking forward to that because I've heard great things, and I know Stephen and Nessie were big fans of it. So that'll be fun. And also I want to go ahead and announce, for those of you who were not aware, oh my God, I did an MCU stream last night on my channel. Earlier this week, I saw and freaking loved Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So if you have not seen that film, I highly recommend checking it out and then going to check out my stream about it, because I did a stream last night with my good friend Aaron about it, who has long been an MCU fan, and she was reveling in the opportunity to actually have a pleasant conversation with me about something from that franchise. I'm not kidding when I say I think this film might go down as like one of my favorite sci-fi fantasy movies, which is really saying something for me about an MCU movie. So please do check that out. And then next week, I'm going to have AR and AK on my channel, because we are celebrating AR's birthday with a stream on her favorite movie, Mulan. So check that out. All right. What else do I have to do for this for this mid-roll? Okay, I'm going to do some reading of our patrons. Let me get this right, because I think last time I did this, I screwed it up. First, our great Wyrms, our great Wyrm patrons, Ridiculous Ed Tollett and Lord John Bronsteen the Wise. Thank you, guys. We also have our Elder Dragons patrons. We have the Cloaked One of the Underworld, Ryan Stavka, the Russian Quartermaster, Reflective Rambling, Arch-Maester Emma, Kate, Mistress of the House of Books. This one guy, Jared Kozal, Doctor of Dragons, not sure who that is. Laura Morley of Starfall, and Lady Rita, the Unbound. Thank you, guys. We appreciate your support. Also, let me make sure to remember to do this. If you would like to join our Slack group, which you should, because we have loads of fun in there, and I'm going to start doing more watch parties, guys, because those are really fun, and it's been a while. But if you want to be part of the Slack group, just go ahead and send an email to we3dragons@gmail.com, and one of us will send you an invitation. Yeah, join up, because we have discussions about everything. We have, we have Zoom chats. We have talked about the latest movies, TV shows. We have a channel where we rate bananas. Yes, you heard that right. And of course, most importantly, we have the Thirst channel, which, is a necessity. So go ahead and join on up if you're not already a member of the Slack group. Okay. So obviously I know, Jared, you don't have your own channel because, you have other things going on in your life. Apparently being a doctor takes priority over talking about stuff on a YouTube channel. I can't imagine why that would be. But do you have anything you wanted to talk about while we're still in the middle?
No, I always would plug my Twitter account at jkozal, JKOZAL. That's where I tend to spend most of the time. I would be engaging with pop culture, talking about Star Wars, House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. And really just any stories that happen to kind of pique my interest at the time. I would say that what John has been kind enough to invite me onto his channel a couple of times, and there are a couple of old streams back in the libraries that I think are quite good. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a part of them, but way back in the day, he invited me to talk about Pride and Prejudice, which is a movie that both of us love dearly. That was, years ago at this point, hard to believe. But then just recently, we did a conversation on The Batman, which was my favorite movie of 2022 that I actually thought was excellent. And that would, our friends Trish and AR were also on, and I thought that we had a really great discussion. So if you haven't seen that yet, please check it out.
Yes, Jess, you're correct. Maybe that was false advertising on my part, but we make up for it in the actual Thirst channel. So, no, I would still say that Pride and Prejudice stream, which was one of my very first streams on my channel, is still one of my favorites. And of course, I will say AR from time to time gives me some grief over the fact that we did a Pride and Prejudice stream where it was just us two guys talking about the movie. But I thought that was a novel approach to it. It's like, here's two guys who are actually talking about a Jane Austen period piece. I thought that was an interesting route to go. And it's not like we were being, we didn't have like a guy attitude about the movie. We were talking about our emotions. And
that was part of the appeal, is we're just like this. We love this beautiful like romance film, Yeah. And for AR, we managed to get her on to talk about a couple other films like Colette, and then she was on our Keira Knightley, extravaganza as well.
Oh yeah, make no mistake, she's been a part of every other like Keira Knightley related stream we've ever done, because of course, for those who are not aware, because I'm often very quiet about it, the three of us, along with a couple other we'll say honorary members, are part of the Knights of Keira, which look for us on Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr, because we do have our our accounts there, and we're gonna get moving on that again with the streams over on my channel too. I just thought, since I'm starting back up again, I wanted to like build back up slowly and have some legitimate discussions before we just launch back into our Keira adoration, but we'll get there. I think we're gonna have to do like I feel like an atonement stream is coming up soon, because that's one that we definitely have to get to, because because that was the one that came right after Pride and Prejudice, and like I was firmly in my I was firmly in my Kira fanboying, at that point, and I was like, what's this next movie directed by Joe Wright and starring Kira? And yeah, so okay, I've gotten gotten that out of my system, done my plugging. So yeah, anything else before we plunge back into Visions?
No, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So the next episode is the Bandits of Golok, which, as I talked about earlier, it's extremely unique. I feel among these films, and it's so like like the other ones have been too, but this just felt particularly rooted in its culture, giving a unique view on the Star Wars world, which I kind of would like to see. Like, I don't necessarily need to see more of this particular story, but I'd kind of like to see more of this world and this version of stuff. I loved the look of the Inquisitor in this, and just so wonderful. And I loved all the colors in this. The animation was extremely beautiful, and I thought the colors just jumped off the screen. And then we got some lightsaber battles for good measure in this. I thought the character, again, let me look up to make sure I'm getting this. I think Ronnie is the little girl, right? I both loved her and felt really, really sorry for Sharuk, because just the fact that this little girl just can't seem to resist using her powers. It's like, please just stop. Yeah, so as far as like overall ranking, this is one of those, this is one of the shorts that, unfortunately, just by virtue of the fact that there are other ones that I liked more, that it winds up a little further down the list, but not because it isn't great, because I think it's incredibly unique. I like this sort of look at the Star Wars universe. I think the characters are great. It's just that, damn it, I can't put them all at the top of the list. So so by virtue of that, some of them, including this one, sort of slide a little bit further down. But what was your take on this one?
I really love this one. This one is probably in the upper half for me. I think for a couple different reasons. One is you mentioned the kind of the Indian cultural inspired influence on this one, which I thought was like very it was very overt, but it was also like very elegant and like beautifully done. I have a couple of friends who are either from India or Indian American, and this is their culture, and they have taken the opportunity to introduce me to some Bollywood films that I have really enjoyed, and I can see kind of some of the influence there, but also just some of the mythological aspects. You mentioned the Inquisitor. He's modeled off. They talk about this in the filmmaker focus. He's modeled off of this this demon from Indian mythology, which I think is just such a cool way to approach that character. But it also brings in a lot of different elements from across the Star Wars, like recognizable elements. Like you see the Aki from The Rise of Skywalker, who is the candy salesman. You see the Purge troopers from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jedi Fallen Order. And so and then there's a train sequence. I always love a good train sequence, in Star Wars, whether it's Solo or the Book of Boba Fett, or now add this one to the list. But ultimately,
I do have to say, whenever I see a train in anything, I'm always brought back to Firefly, and I'm always like, the train heist.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
that is another great one for the genre. But ultimately, I think the reason that I really loved this one so much was because at its heart, it is a story. It is a brother-sister story about a brother trying to protect his young sister who has these special powers. I have two younger sisters. I love them to death. They are my favorite people, and I can only imagine, if one of them were in danger, of being hunted by a tyrannical, empire, what I might do to try to keep them safe. And in this case, I really loved that Sharuk, who's kind of our point of view character here, he doesn't have any special powers. He just happens to, love his sister, and he wants to keep her safe, and he will, do whatever he has to make that happen, whether it's, trying to, tell her, playing along with her story, her fantasy of like, can we be the bandits of Golak, riding for sweets and plunder? What do the bandits ride for? Feast and wonder, like trying to, make her think that this is a game, so she'll be a little bit more, serious about it, to the moment where, he does the desperation, like snatching of the levy, the candy, just to try to draw attention to himself, to, draw them away from her. To ultimately at the end, the choice he ends up making to, let her go, because this is, what she needs to have a better life. And, she has these powers that he doesn't have, but you can see that like the bond that they share is real and then lasting. And, the kind of the gesture, those final gestures that they make to each other, him presenting her with the sweet, that she loves, and then her giving him back their father's flute, which was like their last piece of connection to that part of their family history. And she ultimately, passes it back to him, because, he is now going to need to walk his own path without her, just as she's walking this new path, with the Jedi. And so I thought that was, very emotional, very sweet. This is one of those shorts that made me tear up at the end. I do think that as an overall story, it's probably a little bit more, conventional. It's not as novel as something as Screecher's Nature or the Spy Dancer. But as an example of, a Star Wars story told through this cultural lens that ultimately has a very strong emotional heart to it, I really did love it.
Yeah, it's very, by the way, I think we have a couple of mods in the chat. Keep an eye out. We're getting, we got some spam. I deleted it, but if you guys could just keep an eye on that. Yeah, the story is very much rooted in the familiar. We've seen stuff like the, Inquisitor hunting down younger Jedi. This is stuff we've seen like Rebels and, other, Star Wars stories, but it is the unique cultural lens that makes this unique. And again, I have to highlight the colors of the episode. Just, not that, not that there haven't been, beautiful colors in other shorts, especially like Sith, which was all about like the use of color and all that. But there's something about this, just like, the lights when they're going into like the little town and, stuff like that. It just, I kept going, wow, that's beautiful. So yeah, there's that. Now I love the train sequence too, but I wanted to beat their crap out of those those people who were snitching on her. It's like, can't you just keep your mouth shut? It's a little girl, for the love of God. But that's this world under the Empire, where everybody's so scared that they're, it's that, which is what the Empire wants. It's this like this fear of what's going to be brought down on you, so you're willing to sell out other people to give yourself the feeling of, yeah, but I'm safe, I'm okay, because I'm doing what I'm told. And yeah, it's So yeah, but and you're right, it does have, like, as a train sequence, it's great because it does feel like it's calling back to, you know, things that we've seen in that genre. You know, I just love that, you know, little things like when Sharuk's, you know, climbing on top of the train and the stormtroopers looking out. It's like, you know, and then he doesn't see him, and then he's climbing along the top of it, and they're like, "Hey, what's he doing up there?" Just all that stuff is great fun.
Yeah, it was very like Western Sergio Leone kind of inspired as well too, which I think they talk about in the filmmaker focus as well. Yeah, so I mean, it was just a well done example of that kind of story in Star Wars, and using, like, you know, the Raiders kind of being these like native, you know, people who are trying to, you know, push the Empire out of their land, but they all had very cool designs. And I think they've mentioned that, you know, Guilty Undertaker mentions that, you know, here the Empire is kind of standing in for the British Raj, and, you know, that's another case of where, you know, this isn't, you know, allegory in Star Wars, but it, you know, the real world influences are hard to, you know, overlook. And I think that the story is ultimately richer for the fact that it, you know, doesn't shy away from those moments, and those themes. And I also really love the, you know, we get another surprise Jedi reveal in this, you know, in this one. I love that it would, you know, turn, you know, I had a feeling that the, you know, the old, you know, grandmother was, you know, gonna be the Jedi, but, you know, it was still awesome to see her pull her lightsaber out of her cane. You know, Tara Sinube would be proud with the lightsaber cane. Shout out Joseph Scrimshaw again, but the idea that, you know, she is hiding in plain sight, because no one would ever think, oh, this frail old looking woman, like, she couldn't be dangerous, she couldn't be, you know, defying the Empire, she couldn't be a Jedi. And then when she reveals herself, and the Inquisitor is like, Jedi and Golak, imagine that. And he's just, you know, kind of marveling at it, but he's also kind of sneering at her. And then she proceeds to kick ass. So, which I found very satisfying.
I really love that we hear that line from, and I do want to apologize to everybody again, because I am, like, every time I start to speak, I'm hearing an echo of my voice. So sorry about that. But I love that we hear the Inquisitor say that Twy is a Jedi and Golak. It's so great because it immediately, like, conjures up these, like, it feels, it makes the world feel so real, because it's like, it's implied by that, like, that it would be such a surprise to find a Jedi in this particular place. And why is that? We, you know, as opposed to any other place where a Jedi might be hiding out, but why is, like, not really pertinent to the story, but it adds so much dimension to the situation and to the character of the, you know, both the Jedi and the Inquisitor. And I love stuff like that, you know, lines of dialogue that allow the world to kind of breathe and make it feel like this world is bigger than just the 15 minutes we're devoting to seeing on screen. So yes, Jess, it implies world building. Exactly. It's beautiful. So yeah, and although I will say, like, when this ends, and this isn't like a slight against the film at all, because obviously this is what's going to happen, but I'm once again, like, shaking my head at the Jedi. It's like, well, why does it always got to be, you know, foregoing all attachment? Why can't you just let him go? Like, you know, you're all in hiding. Like, wouldn't it make some sense to, like, throw in some non-Force users in the group? But of course that's the Jedi way, and they're still, you know, following those teachings. But it's like, no, you gotta evolve. You gotta learn that maybe these strict rules aren't quite working, but
yeah,
they haven't learned that lesson yet. So.
Yeah, and I feel like, the whole idea of the Jedi attachments, and George Lucas has talked about this as well. The idea that Jedi can love and Jedi can have attachments. It's just that they can't allow those attachments to consume them and become to drive out like all other emotions, so that like the person that you love, protecting them becomes more important than anything else in the world, to the point that you will lose yourself. That is the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker in a nutshell. And I think ultimately, I had a similar moment of frustration. It's like, come on, just let him go with her, but I do think that ultimately this story was attempting to comment on the idea of selfless versus selfish love, and the idea that Karuk ultimately needs to let Ronnie go because it's a dangerous galaxy for her, and he wants to keep her safe, but he could just want to keep her with him because she's really the only family he has left at this point. But he ultimately makes the decision to let her go selflessly so that she can learn the skills that she will need to be able to defend herself in this dangerous galaxy. And he makes that choice, selflessly, and it is the ultimate act of love, which we see throughout Star Wars. The idea of selfless love, what ultimately what Anakin selfishly wanted to keep Padme with him, and ended up losing her, and then losing himself, and then selflessly sacrificing himself for his son, and then in the sequel trilogy, the idea of what Ben Solo ultimately sacrifices for Rey. It's a theme that Star Wars has done again and again and again and again, and it still holds its power for me. So I thought that this, I think it made more thematic sense than perhaps narrative sense, but it still works. I agree that Jedi could be a little bit looser on these things. Maybe relax on the whole smooching thing too. While you're at it.
I will say this is one of the things that makes me so interested to see the new Jedi Order movie, with Rey 15 years later. I'm interested to see what what her version of a Jedi code is, and what her rules are, because I get the impression that she's going to be more relaxed about certain things. So
I'm very much looking forward to that movie, and I do think that she will be a little bit more enlightened about these things, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I we'll just we're being cautious not to like sidetrack into, oh my god, what do we think's gonna happen in the Rey movie? But no, we'll save that for another time. But Daisy Ridley is awesome, y'all. Nothing but Rey love here.
Rey is my favorite Star Wars character. Rey Skywalker specifically. Come at me.
If I didn't have Ahsoka and Qui-Gon there in my top spots, I'd side with you. But still, we both love the character, so we can leave it at that. So yeah, any final comments about this one before we move on?
Just to shout out, in terms of little comedic beats that I loved in this particular short, the Caridian, the same species as Dewey and Freedy, who keeps fighting with this other this other alien who he thinks is throwing food at him, and then just knocking him around, which it's probably not the greatest thing for him to be doing, but it made me laugh every single time when he's just like, that's it. and
I want to preface this with, I should really, whenever I know I'm gonna be like doing a discussion of something Star Wars related, I should probably hold off on listening to the Force Center discussion until after, so I'm not just stealing from them for the entire time. But something else they mentioned was that I love that this one in particular drew like all these aliens from a lot of modern Star Wars. You've got what you just mentioned, this species from Andor, and then you've also got the Ati-Ati from Rise of Skywalker, and it's just because you do expect to see all the classic stuff, or even the prequel stuff, but it is nice that some of these artists are like, no, hey, we like the sequel stuff too. We're integrating all that in here as well. So yeah, it's. And because I was very much of the prequel generation, it's the same like excitement that I felt in season 1 when in the Village Bride, when we get the battle droids, going Roger, Roger. I'm like, yes, they're still a part of Star Wars. You can't take that away. Okay, so let's move on next to The Pit, which is an interesting one because it's a Japanese studio that did the animation. I'm gonna get this wrong. Dart. No, I'm not even trying to. Why don't you take a stab at it? You're.
Dart Shitayo.
Okay, we're gonna go with that. But also Lucasfilm was involved because the person who came up with the story is a part of Lucasfilm, and they were looking, and I need to look up his name to
Leandre Thomas.
Yep, that's his name. And they were, and like, this is such an incredible story because he came up with this idea and kind of got it through to the right people at Lucasfilm. I think Filoni was a champion of it, and then it went up to Kathleen Kennedy, who was supportive of it. And they were just sort of looking for the right place to tell the story, and they decided to make it part of Visions, which I thought was cool. And that kind of, and this, it makes it very unique amongst the Visions films, because this is an idea that originated within Lucasfilm. But of course, then they brought in a Japanese studio to work on it. This is another one that feels very relevant to a lot of stuff, maybe even more relevant than they anticipated, with like, they're not equal things, but like, having these, these slaves, digging and then, just left in a pit, and all of this stuff coming out at the same time as when there's like a writer's strike, and and especially the fact that this idea came from someone who worked at Lucasfilm and brought it to the higher ups, and the complicated nature of that. It's like, and Disney is like a big company, and it's, and it's all very, like, the timing was very interesting on this one, but it also says a lot just in a larger sense about how when the character of I am looking. Is it Crux? That's his name, right?
Yes.
The fact that he says if you can just get to the city that's been built with the Kyber that they've mined, he can talk to the people and they'll come to their rescue. And it's interesting because it's a really great commentary on the way kind of society reacts to like horrific things that we hear about. Like, they sound really concerned in the moment, but then as soon as the stormtroopers are like, pay no attention, they don't initially like rush out to help. It's kind of that attitude of We see something horrible on the news and we're like, oh God, but then we go back to eating dinner. But then once they hear the voices crying out from the pit, then it becomes impossible to ignore. So I thought this had a lot of great stuff that's very relevant to a lot of things in our real world, and I loved the cast of this is amazing. You've got David Diggs in the main role, which of course so many of us know him from Hamilton, and I love him. And then the rest of the cast is great, and we even have Steve Bloom and Matthew Wood as stormtroopers, which just delights my heart. Now I know that we talked about this a little bit, where I think you said this maybe was one of the ones that you didn't respond to as strongly. I'm interested to see if that still holds true and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, no, I am. This is one I am very glad that I've had the opportunity to rewatch a couple of times, because we talked about this before before it started, how we really wanted to give each one of these shorts their due and kind of not like do them all in one sitting, because they really kind of, they're so different. You kind of need to reset, and you need to take each one as its own entity, not just as like episodes in a television show. But then I didn't take my own advice. I was watching it. I was enjoying it so much that I ended up watching most of them over the course of a single day. And this one being towards the end and being a little bit bleaker in tone, coming off the Spy Dancer and the Bandits of Golok, both of which left me with such emotional highs, and really tugged at my heartstrings, that when I got to this one, I was kind of, I think I was not in the right headspace for it. But I do think that as a individual story, like this is one of the ones that has the clearest vision of what it is about. It is telling the story it is telling, and it's a very familiar Star Wars story, but it's never been told quite through this lens. I mean, I almost, I almost love the story behind this this particular short, with Leandre Thomas, being a longtime Lucasfilm employee who had this idea and really wanted to get it, told, but didn't quite know how. But then he ends up finding these, working his way up through the company, and it, finds its way to the ears of the right people. And then they do the collaboration with this animated studio. That while it's a Japanese studio, it's actually owned. It's an American company. It's owned by Black Americans.
You're right.
It's a majority Black owned, studio that happens to specialize in Japanese animation, and I think that's the perfect marriage for this kind of particular short. And I really, think that the message of it, the idea that everyone has an inner light, and you need to kind of follow that light, or try to get people to listen, because as we see throughout the, this short, like the people who live in that crystal city over the, away from the pit, they don't know that this is happening, and that is where the real world influence really comes into play, of like people not understanding that certain atrocities are being carried out, just a short distance away, and they're living their comfortable lifestyles, and they don't know that the lifestyle was made possible by the sacrifices and the suffering of these people who they have never met and will never know. But in this case, they do, because Crux takes that initiative to help, try to reach them and, get the message out. And then I think, and it's quite a powerful creative choice that he ultimately loses his life for trying to get that message out. The scene where the stormtroopers take him and throw him back in the pit to his death is
horrifying,
devastating. It's a horrible moment, in a narratively good way, but it's very bleak, it's very dark. But then his sacrifice was not in vain, because ultimately, he does, it does inspire the the people who are trapped in the pit to try and raise their voices to make that message heard, and then it is heard. The citizens ultimately they do follow their inner light. They do come and stare down the stormtroopers in that moment where the citizens are facing down a line of Imperial stormtroopers are like, go back to your homes, nothing to see here. And then they don't, they push through. It's a very, satisfying, and the real world parallels are not far off. So on rewatch, I do think that my esteem for this one really did rise because I knew now like what it was and why it was telling this particular story, and I'm very impressed with it. It may not be in terms of my favorite in terms of just the way that it really like tries to tug on my heartstrings and my personal preference for storytelling style, but I do think that it is probably the strongest and perhaps most important message in the entire volume.
Yeah. And I had completely, but you were absolutely right. I had completely forgotten. I had watched the behind the scenes featurette, and so just now I was just going off of the name of the studio, but I remember watching that and seeing like who was actually at the studio and like the origins of the studio. It was like, oh wow, it's like absolutely perfect, just the people they got to work on this, and it's obvious that obviously it meant so much to them, and Guilty points out that like slavery is like a thing that we see very often depicted in Star Wars, but I think it's extremely important that this is a story that's like it feels very real world because we're seeing it both. It's really from the point of view of the slaves, and also these are black slaves that we're seeing, and you just, it's okay sometimes to do parallels in storytelling, and we see that a lot, especially in Star Wars, but sometimes you really do want to get to the crux of it and say, no, this is the truth that we're getting at. This is what we're talking about, so we need to actually present it as it is in the real world, but in this fantasy setting. So I thought that was very powerful, and it is kind of, it's funny because it's not like one of my top picks, for the whole season, and yet, like, you're right. I think the message of it might be the most important, and in a lot of ways it's definitely one of the most powerful of the season. So, and that's the thing, these are all so unique, which is why I get it that you weren't able to resist just going through sort of at a certain point binging them. I was very happy that I'd kind of forced myself to do one film a day for my initial viewing, because I do feel like I got to absorb the stories on, and take them in as they deserve to be taken in. And also just from a film, like, appreciation point of view, it made each one really feel like I was watching a short film instead of like just a mini television episode. And so, but it's hard to do. I didn't do it last season. I went through all of those in like 2 days, maybe. So it's hard to do because they're so good. But I was very happy to take the time to really appreciate these, and this was a great one, and it's very heavy. Which is probably why like the next one that we're going to get to soon, like that's definitely one of the lighter ones, because I feel like you needed that after the immense gravity of this film. I thought the decision to show to have Crux killed in such a manner, it's the fact that like they could have just like, it would have been violent enough if they showed him like getting shot in the city and then they toss his body down to the pit. But no, they drag him back there. He's still alive, and they throw him down the pit to his death. And I was watching it, I was like, holy crap. Like, because we do get some dark stuff in Star Wars animation. I think occasionally Clone Wars showed some of the horrors of war. Bad Batch especially. Like, there's been some heavy stuff with Bad Batch, but for some reason this really hit me as unusually brutal in a way that I was surprised to see.
Yeah, it was brutal. It had to be brutal.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm making a stretch when I say I was thinking a lot about George Floyd during that sequence, and specifically the idea that the stormtroopers, as you mentioned, did not just shoot Crux. They specifically carried him out of the city on like a death march to throw him into the pit in this brutal way. And you have to imagine that like for the entire march back to the pit, what Crux must have been thinking about seeing his life and his mission essentially flash before his eyes. And would it have all been for anything? Was his message heard? And in this case it was, but he does not get to live to see it. And that's a small, ultimately that makes it a very bittersweet and tragic ultimately victory. But it's not the kind that makes you feel like good about people. It makes you feel like people need to wake up, which is what ultimately happens here. And I kind of feel like, again, on my initial viewing, that was one of the things where I was just like, I'm having a good time. I'm watching Star Wars, and then this one hits, and I was like, oh well, that was brutal and sad, but very important. It reminds me, in a little bit of those certain movies that everyone recognizes are like incredible works of important art. Things like Schindler's List or 12 Years a Slave that I have watched once because they're not the kind of movie that you put in when you're looking to have a good time with your friends, but it's a very important story. And I feel like I appreciate this one more as a work of art, probably among the highest among all the ones that Visions has done, even if it's not the one that when I'm looking for a fun 15 to 20 minutes of to watch some Star Wars, probably not going to put this one back on. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a story worth telling. It was an incredibly important story worth telling. And the fact that Leandre Thomas got to tell this story, I think, is a testament to, it's a credit to Lucasfilm that they let him do this, even if, as you mentioned, it's kind of ironically timed that this story happens to be coming out during the writer's strike,
Oh, yeah. Lots of complicated overlapping things going on with that. I will say, side note, if we ever do a stream on Schindler's List, I'm going to talk about how that movie always suckers me in with its filmically beautiful opening sequence with Schindler going out to the restaurant and the classical music piece that's used over that scene, and him working his way into being the popular guy at the party. Like, it's such a joyous, fun opening. If you put aside the whole the fact that a bunch of the people in the room are Nazis, that's not cool. But it does feel like there's a joyous feeling about just the way it's all edited, which of course does not prepare you for the horror of that film. And so I think that's but that's the thing. Like, whenever I start watching that, I can't stop because it's mesmerizing as it's horrifying. So I feel like sooner or later, I'll do a stream on that one, and I'll talk about the complicated feelings I have about the beautiful artistry on display juxtaposed against like the horror of the story and how it just rips me apart whenever I watch it. Such is the brilliance of Mr. Steven Spielberg. I think I've watched that one more times than 12 Years a Slave, but I've still seen 12 Years a Slave maybe like 2 or 3 times, and it just obliterated me each time. Which, by the way, everybody, Chiwetel Ejiofor is a brilliant, brilliant actor. And, you know, if you've never seen that movie, like, suffer through the pain to watch that man's performance, because it's, along with all the other performers in that film, they're all brilliant. Anyway, side note about very sad movies. But do you have anything else to say about The Pit before we go into the home stretch?
Yeah, no, just I do feel like the Guilty Undertaker is mentioning that this one is the closest to Andor in terms of tone. I mean, it's the fact that it's, you know, it's really the fact that this was the most grounded. This was the, you know, I think of Star Wars as space fantasy. This was by far the least fantastical of any of the shorts. You know, it is very grounded, literally. You know, the pit metaphor is, you know, is real. But also, I did appreciate that there were, you know, they did end on that particular grace note of, you know, when with the young girl Livy, who Crux ultimately inspired, you know, and they're being lifted out of the pit to salvation, and she has the Kyber crystal, and we see it kind of, you know, stand up in her hand, and is that meant to indicate that she's perhaps force sensitive? I thought so, but, you know, that didn't necessarily need to be there, but I appreciated that it was, because it ultimately reminded me that, like, this is still taking place within the same fantastical, you know, universe that we all love so dearly. But, you know, it has room to tell a story like this too, that is very, you know, very grounded and, you know, brutal. I mean, even Andor had, you know, some of the, like, you know, the fun fantasy elements of Star Wars that, you know, that were kind of absent from this one. If it weren't for the fact that the oppressors were, like, wearing stormtrooper uniforms, honestly, this could have been completely outside the Star Wars galaxy. But the fact that they chose to tell it within the Star Wars galaxy, I think, was an important message for them to send.
Yeah, no, I had actually almost the exact same reaction with that moment of revealing that she has the Force at the end of the episode. I was like, that didn't quite need to be there, but I wasn't upset about its inclusion either. It's, yeah, it's just sort of driving home that, you know, this does take place in the Star Wars galaxy, and the notion of, you know, this young girl having been inspired. I'm not sure what her relationship with Crux is. For some reason, when I was watching it, I thought it was a brother-sister relationship, but maybe it's a father-daughter relationship.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure, because I thought it was father-daughter, and then it actually seems like her mother, played by Annika Noni Rose, is, I don't know if Crux actually was her father. He seems a little young for it, perhaps, but regardless, I mean, it ultimately, whatever their relationship was, there was a bond there, and it was, you know, that was key to the heart of the story.
So the idea of him passing on this sort of wisdom to her, and then the fact that that's already had a big influence on her, and then the fact that she maybe is destined to, you know, become something more, you know, whether that's a Jedi or just maybe she'll use the Force and some other way throughout her life. But it just shows the kind of ripple effects that Crux's, you know, sort of, you know, his belief and his wisdom, you know, will then, you know, echo down, you know. But yeah, so very extremely powerful film. And so now we get to finish off with a much lighter story and Ao's song, which I did not get to rewatch today because I ran out of time. But there were a lot of things that still stuck out with this one. It's a very hopeful story. I will say the thing that sticks out to me is I loved the design of the Jedi Master. Because it was just so unique, and I don't think we've really seen a Jedi that looked like that before. And like just starting off at the beginning of the short, I love that it opens up with some like opening text to kind of set the scene. And also like this is a period that I don't think we've ever really gotten to see before. Like this is apparently like after the Sith have been defeated, like after the initial conflict. In that way, maybe you could almost even say this might be a sequel to Journey to the Darkhead, a very distant sequel. But yeah, this is another one that is either stop motion or stop motion-esque. I mean, I'd have to rewatch the behind the scenes featurette, but I love that. I particularly loved the stop motion episodes, just because it's decidedly different from what we got in season 1. So since this one might be a bit fresher in your head, so I'm going to turn it over to you at this point. What were your thoughts about this one?
The overwhelming like single word that comes to my mind when I think about this one is lovely. This is just lovely. This is just such a nice story. And I mean, it's an interesting one to end it on. In particular, I find it an interesting choice in contrast to the way that Volume 1 ended, because Volume 1 ended with Akakiri, which is by far the darkest short in that volume. It ends on a very bleak, hopeless kind of note. And as great as the volume was, you're in there like, we're ending on that one. God, what the hell, man? And so I think I still think that short is incredibly valuable. But that I'll just say that one is not one of my favorites of the Vision volume. And I feel like they kind of felt like, if they had chosen to end like the volume with the pit, I think that would have been like an incredibly, powerful note to leave it on, but it would have still been a very kind of like, dark place to leave it. But ending it on this one is just like a breath of fresh air, which is not to say it's not like a very powerful story. It's just, it's interesting that there are no villains in this one. The villains are the Sith who have been gone for hundreds, if not thousands of years at this point. And the conflict, such as it is really, it's the idea that this young girl has this incredible gift that her father doesn't want to let her use because he's understandably afraid of what it might do and what it might mean. But ultimately, as we know, fear is, fear has power, but we cannot let it rule us. And ultimately, Ao's choice in this way to, use her voice, to use her power to ultimately do something that they thought was impossible, which is purify this crystal that had been corrupted, by this ancient evil, is, what her destiny was. And she makes that choice, and ultimately makes the choice to take her gift elsewhere throughout the galaxy. And, she and her father part ways at the end, which is very sad. I did appreciate in this one that the Jedi was like, take 2 weeks to think about it. And she ultimately decides she wants to go. But just on you mentioned the design of that Jedi Kratu. I love that design as well. And just visually, I love the way that they depict essentially Ao's connection to the Force through her voice and her song and the way it interacts with the crystals. Like, that was such a cool, like, I've never thought about the Force being used in that way before. So it was an interesting approach to take. They talk about in the behind the scenes filmmaker focus about one of the directors, their co-directors, Nadia Doris and Daniel Clark. Nadia Doris is a singer, and this short's from South Africa, so it was kind of inspired by her South African heritage. And I found that like this was a very cool way to kind of have the Force be presented in a new light that still feels very familiar and very flowing and very organic. And as I said, it all came together in a very lovely way.
And by the way, the studio who worked on this is Triggerfish. And and her voice was so beautiful. And who knew that maybe it's rather a good thing to let young girls use their voice. How about that? What a revolutionary notion. This was really nice. And going back to the way season 1 ended, I agree. That would not have been my choice. I think I said this to you before. I was actually kind of surprised they didn't choose to end season 1 on something like the 9th Jedi, which I feel would have been a rousing end to the season. But somehow this kind of is, it's kind of a little bit of the same thing with season 1. It's just sort of the inverse of it, where it's a smaller story, but instead of being overwhelmingly dark, it's bright and optimistic. So it feels like a nice coda to end the season, especially after the darkness of the pit. So I'd say on the whole, I'm happier with this ending for for this season. And endings are important, and I'm glad this one goes out on, okay, I feel good. But no, I love the father-daughter relationship in this, and I agree. Like, one of my favorite beats of this was that the Jedi says take 2 weeks and think about it. Things aren't as dire in this, in the world that they're living in. So it's not like, oh, you got to go now. Come on. But it's like, I feel like that's probably something that, did the Jedi kind of discard this at some point where they were like, no, we're going to get them super young before they can decide for themselves. Which is really kind of, not great as we further examine the ways of the Jedi. But I just don't imagine tiny little Ahsoka being presented with like, a 2 week, like, you can decide either way. It feels like the Jedi younglings, in sort of the main prequel era are kind of like, you're Force sensitive, you're coming with us. so this was a better way to look at that. I guess I don't have too much to say about this one. Just that like what you said, it's just really pleasant, and I just loved the notion of song being and someone's voice being used to to purify something that's been damaged by by evil hands, and the fact that it's something that, like, her father and others view as something that could be dangerous. Again, like, it's tough to ignore the real world sort of analogies of that we can't let girls use their voice because it could be dangerous, and like, no, how about just let them do their thing, and it's probably going to turn out really good. So, but I don't think her father has, the malevolent intent that we see with that sort of real world analogy. He's just worried about her, but it's all about that notion of kind of letting someone go. And we do see that at the end of the episode, even as she's been given a choice, but he has to, like, his place is there on the planet doing what he's doing. And this is This feels to me like, and this is not a slight against the Bandits of Golak, but this felt like a much more natural, satisfying version of, I have to let this person go for them to, to be who they're meant to be, because it's something where they both get like resolution, and they get to say goodbye to each other in a proper way. And it's not necessarily, I mean, this is pretty far back, so I don't know if things work the same way. It might not even be goodbye forever, so and the fact that it's her choice, that we don't get the impression that she's being like pressured into this, which I like a lot. So yeah, just a really beautiful story, and a very uplifting way to end season 2 of Star Wars Visions.
Yeah, and I really there's a line in this this one from the Jedi Kratu that was in the trailer, and I remember thinking it was a very powerful line within the context of the trailer, and then it ends up being an incredibly powerful line here within the short, like right at the very end, where she tells Ao and her father about we cannot choose where our calling takes us, only whether or not to answer. And I found very moving. It really is the whole idea of destiny in Star Wars, laid bare right there.
It's a very Gandalf line.
Yes, it is.
It never takes much for me to draw a Lord of the Rings analogy. So yeah, unless you have anything else to add about that one, I think we can draw to a close. We hit right at 2 hours. I'm doing good. I'm not, I always like to be respectful of Steven's desire to, be at around 2 hours. Because as we all know, that doesn't happen very often over on my channel.
Yeah, I'll just in keeping with the this was nice, this was fun, this was lovely kind of thing. I would just say that these the little rabbit bear species was very cute, and I also feel like people always talk about like, oh, what Star Wars planet would you want to live on? What Star Wars planet would you want to vacation on? And the default answer is usually Naboo, Naboo, and Naboo. This planet Corbin looks pretty nice too. I would not mind spending a week or two vacationing there. Maybe and Pabu as well, just as long as it's not tidal wave season.
I know
that's a Bad Batch reference for those of you who don't know.
There's always got to be something wrong with the idyllic paradise. Doesn't there? Yeah, if we could avoid the tidal waves, Pabu, I think, sounds like the perfect place to retire. And yeah, as Jared just mentioned, if you don't get that reference, you need to watch Bad Batch, all of you. Yeah, so looking back over this this whole season, do you have sort of any more big picture thoughts? We've kind of already covered what our general favorites of the season were, but sort of taking it all in, do you have anything you want to say, capping off this season?
I would just quote Obi-Wan Kenobi from the very first Star Wars film. It felt like this season really, it was taking its first step into a larger world, which was, I think, Visions Volume 1, I thought was very appropriate that it was all Japanese, animation, because Star Wars owes so much to, Japan and the films of Akira Kurosawa, and, all those, those influences that inspired George Lucas in the making of the original Star Wars film. So if there was going to be one culture that really, took the lead for Volume 1 with this experiment that no one was quite sure would work, I'm glad that it was a Japanese culture. But I am very happy that for season 2 they decided to expand it out to the rest of the world, and we got to see not only different animation styles but different cultural perspectives, and just a greater diversity of stories and the diversity in the people telling those stories. And that's, I think, part of the reason why ultimately I do think that Visions Volume 2 is a step up from Visions Volume 1, and just a great success for Lucasfilm all around. And I expect we will get a Volume 3. I'm eager to see what they will do with it. You know, it will probably come out in like 2025 or so. Star Wars Celebration is going back to Japan. I wouldn't be surprised if they return more to like the Japanese anime style focus for things going forward. But even if they do end up going back to primarily that style, I'm glad that we got this volume that kind of allowed us to break things open a bit and to tell certain Star Wars stories that I had never really visualized would be seen in this galaxy. Something like the Screecher's Reach, or something like the Bandits of Golak, or something even like the Pit. You know, and I think that it was a very well balanced volume overall. You know, there was truly, in the classic Star Wars buffet analogy, there was something for everyone here. Not everyone may love every single one of these, but I feel like I was, you know, I tend to like a lot of Star Wars stuff, so I enjoyed them all. But I feel like this in particular was a very, you know, rich and diverse slate of Star Wars storytelling, and there will be a few that I am going to definitely be revisiting, you know, in the years to come.
I will say that ironically, it seems like Visions might be something that Lucasfilm won't have to put on hold with the writer's strike, because a lot of, you know, a lot of this, because it's done in other countries, you know, is outside of, you know, the American guilds. So you know, so a lot of that work can be, and you know, I imagine there's still some stuff that's covered by that, probably like with, you know, people who do like the translations and subtitles and stuff like that. But the majority of the work seems like that they'll still be able to press ahead with. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're already like, yeah, season 3 is greenlit. Let's get moving on that, because it'll be one of the few things that isn't held up. But yeah, I'm wondering. I've been trying to wonder what I want to see for season 3, as far as if it takes another evolution, or I think I wouldn't mind seeing some like, again, we talked about this, like there's many of these shorts that don't require any follow-up and are kind of perfect as they are. But I wouldn't mind the next season maybe picking up the threads of a couple stories, or even they gave in the producers of Visions gave an interview about this, where they didn't seem to rule out the possibility of Visions eventually evolving beyond the short film sort of, you know, that medium, and the potential for it to grow into something bigger. It would be very interesting to have one season of Visions be like, instead of 9 shorts, maybe it's like 2 or 3 films, you know, and that would be interesting. And yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing something like that for, you know, I mean, this is one that gets thrown around all the time, but yeah, the 9th Jedi is one, and I'd even like to see, you know, this season with you know, potentially with a Journey to the Dark Head, exploring that world a bit more, and then some studios I'd like for them to do, like, given another shot to do some more. I'd really like to see something else from Cartoon Saloon, who did Screecher's Reach. I think that story is beautifully standalone, but I'd like to see another, you know, version of, you know, another Star Wars story from that lens, because I love their style. And So yeah, but I'm sure there's also plenty of different studios that they want to give opportunities to. So there's a reason why I'm not the one making those decisions, because I'm very indecisive about what I actually want. But I'm sure it'll be great regardless of whatever they do. So yeah, so the great season. I loved it. It's still like Visions is one of my favorite Star Wars things that they're doing, because I think it's like some of the most creative Star Wars stuff we've gotten. Yeah. So just wrapping up, I'll once again just mention that next week, Stephen, Nessie, and I will be talking about the Dungeons and Dragons movie, and maybe we'll have somebody else join us. I don't know. I have to talk to them. Thank you, Teleport and Gaming. It's nice to have you on today, and yeah, we appreciate it. I'm not a substitute for Steven. I apologize. We'll have him. We'll have him back next week, hopefully feeling better. But yeah, so we'll be talking about the D&D movie, which will be a lot of fun. And then remember to hop over to my channel to check out the stream I did last night on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, the first MCU movie that I've well, not quite the first, because I just Spider-Man No Way Home qualifies, even though that had a lot of this baked in nostalgia that was going to appeal to me, but Guardians 3 was the first truly pure MCU movie that I just went crazy over. So I'd love it if you guys would check out that stream. And then next week on my channel will be a discussion of the animated classic Mulan for AR's birthday, and AK will be joining us too. Yeah, yes, is Steven, trust me, even if he's on death's door, he'll come on and talk about the D&D movie. I don't think anything will hold him back from that. So yeah, and once again, just making sure that I tick every box. If you guys are not part of the Slack group, go ahead and send us an email at we3dragons@gmail.com, and we'll get you in there and have lots of fun. Like I said before, I'm going to start doing some more of the watch parties, because those are a bunch of fun, and it's honestly just great to sit around, even if we're not together in person. It's great to sit down and watch movies with friends. So we're going to get back to doing that. And I think that's it. And Jared, you want to go ahead and promote yourself, your your social media account?
No, just on Twitter at @Kozal. If you want to look me up there and see what thoughts are percolating around my head related to the most recent Star Wars projects, and anything else that might happen to be any other stories that might happen to be catching my fancy. And occasionally you'll see me be mad about my football teams, both the NFL and Premier League soccer too. But I try to be positive, because I do love these stories, and that's why I'm here. But sometimes I do get, sports are kind of where my dark side.
It is the price I pay for following you for all your positivity, that occasionally I have to endure some sports talk. But that's okay. No, seriously, I'm just gonna say, people, if you're not following Jared on Twitter, it's one of the best things you can possibly do, because Jared, since early days, it's been one of the best things I've ever done, because you are a wonderfully positive voice in a sea of crap and negativity. There's so much of it that just makes up, especially nowadays on Twitter. But I love that we sort of met each other through a shared desire for positivity in some of these things that we love. we still don't always, despite what people might think, we still don't always agree 100% on everything. But we're like, even the points we disagree about, we're like, it never enters into our minds to be anything less than completely respectful of each other's viewpoints, which is just one of the most rewarding things about our friendship. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for being willing to come on here and continue to talk Star Wars with me. I know it's a tough thing to ask.
Yeah. No, I'm just always happy when I have the opportunity to do it, and when the stars align. And I'm hopeful that there will be more opportunities in the future. As I enter the next chapter of my career, I should hopefully have a little bit more time, and I'd love to keep talking about the stories we love, whether that's in the galaxy far, far away, or some that are a little bit closer to home. And definitely, whenever the Knights of Kira, gather at the round table again, I will be there.
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna get there. Once again, I'm gonna plug all the Knights of Kira accounts across Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr. Really, I mean, if you're not following those accounts, what are you even doing? Everyone should worship at the altar of Kira. Okay, I'm done. I swear I'm done. Yeah, so I feel like I was just about to say something else, but then I got derailed. Well, it couldn't have been that important. Thank you all for tuning in for this different episode of Here Be Dragons without the main dragon. But I hope I hope I was an okay substitute today. Thank you all for watching. And oh yeah, there's that thing that Steven always says at the end of these scenes. You know what it is. Peace and be excellent to each other. Bye.